Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
The butcher's table. The stainless steel gleamed under the harsh surgical lights, reflecting the crimson sheen like a macabre mirror. A rhythmic hiss of ventilators punctuated the silence. A mechanical heartbeat replacing the one that was being systematically silenced on the table below. Viktor Volkov stood a few feet away, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the sterile environment. His face, usually a mask of affable charm, was now a cold, granite landscape. He watched with detached interest as Dr. Anya Petrova, her face obscured by a surgical mask and shield, worked with practiced precision. Perfusion rates, Volkov asked, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the quiet. Maintaining optimal levels, Mr. Volkov. Dr. Petrova replied, her voice muffled. Her gloved hands moved with swift efficiency, disconnecting a tangle of veins and arteries. The removed organ, a glistening kidney, was immediately placed in a chilled transport container. Volkov nodded. His eyes never leaving the table. Strapped down, pale and gaunt, was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. A silent scream lost in the hum of the machines. She tried to focus on a crack in the ceiling, willing herself to be anywhere but here. But the smell of antiseptic and blood was inescapable. He found her eyes, and a cruel smile touched Volkov's lips. "Patience, little sparrow," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Think of yourself as a donor. A generous contribution to the greater good." The woman flinched, understanding dawning in her eyes. A guttural sob escaped her lips, cut short by the anesthetic being pumped into her veins. Her struggles weakened, her gaze unfocused. "Liver next, Anya," Volkov instructed, gesturing with a gloved hand. "Recipient is waiting." Dr. Petrova acknowledged with a nod and adjusted her instruments. Efficiency was paramount. Time was money, and in this business, both were fleeting. Two other figures, burly and impassive, stood guard by the door. Their presence was a silent promise of violence, a deterrent to any foolish notions of escape. They were Volkov's shadow, his enforcers, their loyalty bought and paid for in blood money. Volkov pulled out a slim, gold-plated phone and dialed a number. "Status report," he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "Extraction team is en route to the second location, Mr. Volkov. Minimal resistance expected. Ensure minimal complications. We cannot afford any unnecessary attention." He paused, his eyes hardening. "And ensure the documents are prepared. The transfer must be seamless." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He surveyed the scene once more, his gaze sweeping over the operating table, the medical equipment, the watchful guards. Every detail was meticulously planned, every contingency accounted for. He left nothing to chance. He approached the table again, his shadow falling over the unconscious woman. He reached out, his gloved hand brushing against her forehead. He was surprised to find her skin so cold. "Such a waste," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "So much potential reduced to spare parts." He shook his head, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossing his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze that defined him. He turned to Dr. Petrova. "Proceed with the corneal extraction. Then dispose of the remains. Efficiently, discreetly." He walked towards the door, leaving the sterile operating theater and the woman on the table behind. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, he paused, a thought crossing his mind that he should call his daughter. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but the thought was quickly dismissed. There was no time for sentiment. Not in this business. He had a meeting to attend, a deal to finalize. A fresh supply of donors was expected tomorrow. The demand was always insatiable. The gears of his gruesome enterprise never stopped turning. Ghosts of the past. The axe cleaved the redwood, the impact resonating through the hushed woods. Lucas Thorne, his body a landscape of taut muscle glistening with exertion, scarcely noticed the burn in his hands. Each powerful arc was a self-inflicted ordeal, a harsh cadence intended to quell the specters that haunted him. He swung again, splitting the wood with a controlled violence that masked the quake in his spirit. He had chosen this existence, isolation, The harsh embrace of the wild.it was a voluntary banishment, atonement for transgressions that clung to him like shadows. The fire sparked and popped, a miniature replica of the chaos churning within that he paused, the axe's half to cool anchor against his palm, and shut his eyes. *****. The vision assaulted him with its usual ferocity. A grimy alleyway in Kabul, the acrid reek of burning refuse and dread saturating the air, children, faces pinched with hunger, huddled for safety behind him. He recalled the coppery taste of blood, the earth-shattering blast of the RPG, the shrieks. Always the shrieks that Sarah's wide, petrified gaze flashed before him, the last image before oblivion that he had sworn to protect them. He had been unable, that he opened his eyes. The stark reality of the woods a brutal counterpoint to the inferno of his recollection. Yet the wraiths persisted, their accusations a constant, nagging undertone. He swiped the sweat from his forehead, the rough material abrasive against his skin. He had to keep active. Inertia was an incubator for despair. He resumed his regimen. An unforgiving loop of pull-ups on a sturdy branch, close-quarters combat with an invisible opponent, sprints through the dense underbrush. Each motion was precise, efficient, honed by years of training and a desperate yearning for readiness. Ready for what? He didn't consciously know, but perhaps a part of him did. Ready for redemption. The sun began its descent, staining the sky with vibrant strokes of coral and violet. Lucas concluded his exercises, his frame weary yet his thoughts, for the moment, lucid. He returned to his cabin, a modest sanctuary nestled deep among the trees. He consumed a sparse meal of jerky and nuts, the forest's silence a heavy weight around him. Then, it cut through. A tenuous, keening sound carried on. The evening breeze. He froze, every nerve alight. It was distant, barely audible, but unmistakable. A cry. He remained still, listening with fierce intensity. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then it came again, clearer now, threaded with pure panic, multiple voices this time. The thin wails of children. He ordered himself to disregard it could be anything, animals, the wind playing tricks. He had vowed to remain detached, to embrace a life of tranquility. He had paid his penance. But the cries persisted, tearing at the fragile serenity he had constructed. A familiar fury bubbled up within him, a fierce impulse to shield the defenseless. The phantoms of Kabul stirred, demanding requital. He moved with swift purpose, his ingrained training taking over. He snatched his worn leather jacket, his hand moving as if of its own volition to the sheathed knife strapped to his thigh. He paused, his gaze drawn to a faded picture on the small table. Sarah's radiant face, brimming with vitality. He shut his eyes, a silent pledge taking shape in his soul. Never again. He emerged from the cabin and into the encroaching darkness, the screams echoing, guiding him towards the source of the terror. The axe stood sentinel against the redwood, a silent witness to the crumbling of Lucas Thorne's hard-won solitude. The rescue was on, the devil's playground. The air, thick with the sickly perfume of rot, clung to Lucas, a stark contrast to the sharp, clean scent of pine he craved. He followed the faint, persistent tire tracks spiraling away from the derelict cabin. They scratched a path through the underbrush, eventually dissolving into what appeared to be unbroken stone. Lucas, however, knew better. His calloused fingers danced over the cool rock face, seeking the almost invisible join. Deceptive. A pressure trigger. Most likely. He located it nestled among the ferns, cunningly disguised as a gnarled root. He pressed, and the earth groaned in protest as the rock face shuddered inward, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. The reek intensified, a gut-wrenching blend of antiseptic and something metallic, an undeniably human tang. He drew his knife, its familiar heft a reassurance in his grip, and entered the passage. Spilled into a vast, echoing chamber, bathed in the harsh, buzzing glare of fluorescent tubes. The sterile air hung heavy with a palpable sense of clinical dread. Cages, row upon row of cold steel, lined the walls, each containing a child. Some slept, curled into defensive knots upon meager mattresses. Others stared blankly, eyes wide with a terror echoing the hollowness gnawing at Lucas's core. He moved with stealth, his boots silent on the concrete floor, each step measured. His gaze swept across the faces, searching, desperate. He spotted them in the third row, huddled together in the cage's farthest corner. Maya, her face smudged with grime, her eyes blazing with defiance even in captivity, and Ethan, clinging to her like a barnacle. His small face ashen and tear-streaked, he froze, transfixed, a tidal wave of guilt threatening to drown him. He should have been faster. He should have anticipated this, abruptly. A door at the far end of the room swung open, revealing a figure swathed in a surgical gown. The doctor. He was flanked by two hulking men, faces like granite, hands hovering near the weapons strapped to their thighs. The doctor advanced toward Ethan's cage, a clipboard clutched in his hand, and he offered no greeting, his gaze, devoid of warmth, raking over Ethan with a detached appraisal that twisted Lucas's stomach. Maya bristled, stepping protectively in front of Ethan, a physical barrier against the doctor's chilling scrutiny. "Leave him alone," she declared, her voice trembling yet resolute. Ignoring her, the doctor unlocked the cage. One of the guards reached inside, seizing Ethan by the arm. A piercing shriek tore from Ethan's throat, a desperate plea that reverberated through the cavernous space. Maya launched herself at the guard's hand, clawing and scratching, but was easily shrugged off. "No, Ethan!" she screamed, her voice breaking with terror. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Lucas, his instincts sharpening. He couldn't permit this. Not again. He melted into the shadows, observing, strategizing. He had to assess the layout, the number of hostiles, the escape routes. The doctor and his escorts steered Ethan toward another door, emblazoned with a stark biohazard symbol. Uncontrollable sobs racked Ethan's small frame, his body trembling with fear. Lucas glimpsed a glint of metal within the room, a tray arrayed with surgical instruments. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was beyond abduction. This was harvesting. They intended to strip Ethan of his organs. He watched as the guards secured Ethan to a frigid metal operating table. The doctor approached, a syringe glinting in his hand. Ethan thrashed, his eyes reflecting pure, unadulterated panic. "Please," Ethan whimpered, his voice a fragile whisper. "Please, don't hurt me." The doctor's expression remained a blank canvas. He swabbed Ethan's arm with alcohol. Lucas knew time had run out. He could delay no longer. Action was imperative, now no one left behind. The wind keened a mournful tune through the pines, echoing the unease churning within Lucas. The laptop displayed a grainy satellite view. The Blackwood Institute, its stark, clinical buildings a jarring presence against the dark forest. Captives were inside. He knew it with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones. Damn it, he'd vowed to leave it all behind, to bury the specters of Mogadishu. But the news article, the hushed whispers gleaned from the dark corners of the internet, had breached his defenses, rekindling the embers he desperately tried to smother. He magnified the image, his rough fingertip tracing the perimeter fence motion sensors, perhaps laser grids standard procedure for those concealing secrets and souls. The main entrance was a fortress, but the western edge met a dense, untamed thicket, fewer prying eyes, more natural concealment. A potential breach. He snapped the laptop shut. The sudden quiet in the cabin amplified by the tempest outside. He needed more than pixels. He needed a ground-level perspective. He shrugged into his weathered leather jacket, its familiar weight a small comfort against the encroaching cold. The Jeep sputtered to life after a prolonged struggle, its engine groaning like an old dog. Lucas wrestled it down the rutted track, headlights piercing the gloom before dawn. Hours later, he pulled into a roadside diner miles from his target. Settling into a secluded booth, he nursed a tepid coffee and listened. The waitress, Brenda, a woman with world-weary eyes and a name tag, proved a valuable source. She'd overheard truckers discussing clandestine deliveries to Blackwood, unmarked vans, hushed exchanges. She'd even glimpsed staff in town, purchasing supplies, medical supplies, in alarming quantities. Lucas posed innocuous questions, feigning interest in local happenings. He absorbed every detail, storing each piece of information like precious cargo. The Institute's director was a recluse named Dr. Albright. Security was oppressive, but murmurs circulated regarding disgruntled former employees, individuals who'd resigned after witnessing unspeakable things. Back in the cabin, Lucas unfurled a topographical map on the scarred table. He pinpointed likely entry points, The security lapses Brenda had unwittingly revealed from his battered kit bag, its canvas worn. He extracted the meticulously maintained contents. Night vision goggles, a suppressed pistol, a breaching kit, trauma supplies. The practiced ritual soothed him, pushing back the encroaching darkness. He ran a thumb along the cool steel of the pistol, a contrast to the fierce resolve burning in his spirit. He saw Miriam again, her face twisted in terror, her small hand outstretched as the RPG ripped through the Humvee. He'd sworn then, amidst the chaos and the carnage, that he would never allow another child to suffer. He'd failed Miriam. He refused to fail these children. He verified the charge on his communication device, a hardened military-grade unit designed to overcome most signal interference. He needed a lifeline, just in case. This was new territory after years away. He regarded his reflection in the grimy window. The man staring back was a specter, haunted by his past, laden with sorrow. But there was something else as well, a spark of hope, a flicker of intent. He gathered the last of his kit. A feeling of somber resolve settling over him. He was stepping into the abyss, facing unknown dangers. But his motive wasn't personal. It was for the innocents confined within those sterile white walls. He was doing it so that no child would be left forgotten. Into the lion's den. The chain-link fence sang a low, mournful hum as Lucas cut through it with silent bolt cutters. Moonlight painted the compound in shades of gray, exaggerating the industrial ugliness of the prefabricated buildings. He'd been watching for 3 days, mapping patrol routes, blind spots, and camera angles. The wind carried the faint scent of diesel and something else, something metallic and sharp that made his stomach clench. He moved like a ghost, a shadow flitting between stacks of crates. His black tactical gear absorbed the minimal light, making him nearly invisible against the backdrop of the factory. The first guard was leaning against a wall, smoking, his AK-47 slung carelessly over his shoulder. Lucas bypassed him completely, knowing that an unnecessary engagement was a risk he couldn't afford. The second checkpoint was trickier. Two guards stood under a floodlight, their conversation punctuated by nervous laughter. Lucas circled around. Using the cover of a dilapidated delivery truck, he tossed a small rock, creating a diversion towards the back of the building. One guard went to investigate, leaving his partner alone. That was all Lucas needed. He closed the distance in 3 swift strides, silencing the remaining guard with a chokehold before he could react. The body slumped to the ground, a silent testament to Lucas's brutal efficiency. Dragging the guard into the shadows, Lucas knelt beside him. "Where is Volkov?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. The guard, young and scared, stammered, his eyes wide with terror. I don't know what you're talking about." Lucas tightened his grip, cutting off the man's air supply. "Don't play games, Volkov." "Where is he?" The guard gasped, his face turning red. "Upstairs. The main office, top floor." "And what is this place? What happens here?" Tears streamed down the guard's face. Organ harvesting. They take people. He couldn't finish the sentence, choked with sobs. Lucas released him, a wave of nausea washing over him. He already suspected it, but hearing it confirmed. It felt like a punch to the gut. "How many?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know many. They come in trucks. They never leave." Lucas left the guard tied and gagged, a promise of retribution hanging in the air. He moved towards the main building, his resolve hardening. He would make Volkov pay for his sins. The entrance was secured by a steel door with a keypad. Lucas pulled out a slim device from his belt. Bypassing the security system in seconds, he slipped inside, finding himself in a long, sterile corridor. The air was thick with the antiseptic smell of bleach, a pathetic attempt to mask the horrors that lay beneath. He found the central control room on the second floor. Banks of monitors displayed grainy images of the facility. Hallways, operating rooms, holding cells. The surveillance system was sophisticated, but Lucas was better. He worked quickly, rerouting the camera feeds, creating loops, and finally, shutting down the entire system. The screens flickered and died, plunging the control room into darkness. Now he was blind, but so was Volkov. He moved towards the stairs leading to the top floor. He heard voices. 2 men, their tones low and urgent. He pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. The shipment is delayed. The border patrol is cracking down. Volkov won't be happy. He needs those organs. Volkov. His name hung in the air, a promise of violence. Lucas knew then that he was close. Very close. He checked his weapon, the weight familiar and comforting in his hand. He took a deep breath and started climbing the stairs, each step bringing him closer to the lion's den. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, mingling with the stench of fear and desperation. He could almost taste the evil that permeated this place. He was ready. Sister's gambit. The sharp tang of ammonia assaulted Maya's senses. The cleaning supply closet, illuminated by a sputtering bulb, resembled a sad excuse for an armory. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, a frantic counterpoint to the oppressive quiet. She'd slipped away while the guard outside their door had been distracted by an argument crackling over his comm now. Armed with a scant portion of industrial cleaner and handful of rags, the moment had arrived. Ethan was a tight coil of anxiety near their cell's entrance. His slight frame shaking, he gripped the battered sketchpad Lucas had smuggled to them, its pages alive with impossible beasts and far-off vistas, a universe removed from their grim reality. Maya, are you certain this will work? His voice, a mere breath, trembled with apprehension. Absolutely, she affirmed, striving for a confidence she felt far from. Lucas emphasized the importance of distraction. This place is a fortress, Ethan. We need to sow discord. She saturated the rags, the acrid vapors stinging her eyes. When I signal, you bolt. Understood? East wing. Lucas mentioned a laundry chute there. Ethan nodded, eyes wide and luminous with trepidation. He looked so fragile, so exposed. She loathed putting him in harm's way. Yet remaining here was not an option. Taking a steadying breath, Maya twisted open a massive container of floor sealant. The scent was cloying, overwhelmingly chemical. She deliberately emptied a generous quantity onto the floor near the main corridor, creating a shimmering, treacherous pool. Then, with a final, fleeting glance at her brother, she hurled the ammonia-soaked rags into the viscous spill and retreated. The effect was instantaneous. A hiss of vaporous smoke billowed outwards, followed by a sharp, cracking report. The concoction had ignited, creating a small, contained burst that filled the corridor with noxious fumes and a dense, suffocating fog. The fire alarms erupted in a piercing screech, their deafening cry reverberating throughout the facility. Now, Ethan, go! Maya shouted, propelling him toward the doorway. For a heartbeat, Ethan hesitated. His gaze flooded with terror, before he bolted down the hallway. Heeding Maya's directions, she followed close on his heels, coughing and shielding her face from the choking cloud. Their flight was abruptly curtailed. Two guards, faces concealed behind masks, emerged from a side passageway. Weapons raised menacingly, Maya thrust Ethan behind her, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, outmaneuvered. Back to your cell? One of the guards bellowed, his voice garbled by the mask he grabbed for Maya. His grip on her arm like a vice. Ethan screamed, a keening wail that sliced through the pandemonium. He struggled against Maya, his small hands grasping desperately, but the guard held her firm. Another guard seized Ethan, yanking him away from his sister's protective embrace. Maya fought with fierce abandon, kicking and writhing, but their captors possessed superior strength. Ethan, no! Maya cried, her voice cracking with raw despair. She lashed out, desperate to reach her brother's side. Suddenly, a different set of alarms blared, distinct from the initial warning, a deeper, more urgent resonance. Crimson lights pulsed, bathing the corridor in a menacing sheen. A voice thundered over the intercom. Lockdown initiated. Sector 3 compromised. Lockdown initiated. The guards tightened their hold, their expressions grim and unwavering. The diversion, rather than opening an escape route, had slammed a gate shut. Maya's calculated risk had detonated in her face. They were hauled back to their cell, the unforgiving clang of the door sealing their confinement. Ethan was consumed by inconsolable sobs, burying his face in his hands. Maya sat beside him, her vision stinging with disappointment and dread. She had miscalculated. She had worsened their predicament. The facility was now at peak alert. Whatever slim hope Lucas possessed of rescuing them had just dwindled to near insignificance. Wherever Lucas was, he would realize something catastrophic had occurred. The awareness offered a scant shard of solace amidst the swelling waves of despair. At least he would understand they hadn't surrendered, and even imprisoned by lockdown, Maya stubbornly resisted yielding to hopelessness. She simply required a fresh approach, a more effective scheme, because Ethan was relying on her, and she wouldn't fail him. Not again. The gauntlet. The air tasted of bleach and dread, a cloying combination that clung to the back of Lucas's throat. He moved with the quiet grace of a predator, every nerve humming. The holding cells were the expected tableau of despair. Cold steel, unforgiving concrete, the lingering scent of old blood. He located them in the third chamber of Maya, sporting a livid bruise but radiating defiance, huddled close to Ethan, who trembled like a leaf. "Lucas!" Her voice rasped, barely audible. "You came back for us. Let's go," he urged, his tone a low growl. Time to leave. The cell's lock offered minimal resistance. A sliver of metal, salvaged from a fractured vent, sprung it open in seconds. He guided Maya and Ethan out, keeping them tucked tight against him. They navigated the antiseptic corridors with swift, silent purpose, aiming for the emergency exit he had earmarked during his initial sweep. Their progress was cut short. A figure materialized, barring their escape. Towering and broad-shouldered, the man exuded a palpable aura of threat, impeccably dressed. Yet the chill in his gaze was far from professional. The head of security. Attempting to abscond? He purred, his voice a silken menace. "Regrettably, I cannot permit such a breach." Lucas positioned Maya and Ethan behind him, a human shield. "This doesn't need to escalate," he argued, buying them precious seconds. "Let them go and this ends here." A mirthless chuckle escaped the chief. "Sentimentality? From you, Thorne? I'm profoundly disappointed that I anticipated a sterner challenge." He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like a death knell, causing Ethan to flinch. "Now, step aside, or face the consequences." Lucas knew parley was futile. He nodded sharply at Maya. "Get Ethan out. Go now." Hesitation flickered across Maya's face, fear warring with resolve, but she grasped the command. Seizing Ethan's hand, she propelled him towards the emergency exit, her expression a study in grim determination. The chief surged forward. Lucas met his attack head-on. The ensuing clash was a savage ballet of force and agility within the confined space. The chief possessed brute strength and formal training, but Lucas was quicker, driven by desperation. He weaponized the environment, slamming his opponent against the wall, using the corridor's narrowness to constrict the man's movements. A blow connected, sending a jolt of agony through Lucas's ribs, forcing a metallic tang onto his tongue. Ignoring the pain, he surged forward, fueled by adrenaline and the fierce imperative to protect the innocents behind him. A chink in the chief's armor appeared, a microsecond of vulnerability. Lucas exploited it without mercy. A vicious right cross landing squarely on the man's jaw. Staggering. Momentarily disoriented, the chief found no respite. A knee slammed into his gut, followed by a relentless barrage of blows that left him gasping for air. Finally, with a guttural groan, the chief crumpled, a defeated mass on the unforgiving floor. Lucas stood over him, lungs burning, blood slick on his knuckles. He was battered, bruised, but victorious. The triumph came at a steep price. A searing lance of pain shot up his left leg, signaling a knife wound ignored in the heat of battle. Ripping a strip from his already tattered shirt, he created a makeshift tourniquet, attempting to stem the flow of blood. He hobbled towards the emergency exit, where Maya and Ethan waited, their faces etched with anxiety. "Are you hurt badly?" Maya's voice quivered. Lucas summoned a smile, though it felt brittle and false. "We're all in one piece," he managed, his voice betraying his words. "Let's move. This place is about to become a lot less hospitable." He understood the road ahead would be fraught with peril. He was wounded, they were exposed, and the full weight of authority would soon bear down upon them. He had made a promise. However, he would not abandon them. He would deliver them from this nightmare, whatever the cost, running blind. The air tasted of pine needles and desperation. Lucas crashed through the undergrowth, Maya hot on his heels, tugging a whimpering Ethan behind them. The guttural shouts of Volkov's men echoed through the trees, punctuated by the snap of twigs and the distant bark of dogs. "Faster!" Lucas rasped, his lungs burning. He pushed a low-hanging branch out of Maya's face. He'd taken a glancing blow during their escape, a searing pain blossoming in his ribs. But he dared not slow. He risked a quick glance back. The hounds were gaining. He veered sharply left, towards a treacherous ravine he remembered from his day's trapping. "Stay close!" He yelled over his shoulder. He leapt, landing awkwardly on the far side, his injured ribs protesting with a fresh wave of agony. He reached back, pulling Maya up after her successful jump. Ethan, however, froze at the edge, his eyes wide with terror. "Ethan, you can do it!" Maya urged, her voice strained. "Just like we practiced at the creek." He shook his head, tears welling. Lucas knelt, extending a hand. "Come on, son. Trust me." His voice, usually gruff, held a surprising gentleness. Ethan hesitated, then, with a sob, launched himself forward. Lucas caught him, stumbling slightly, and hauled him across. They pressed on, Lucas using his knowledge of the forest to their advantage. He led them through thickets of thorny bushes, forcing their pursuers to slow. He scrambled over fallen logs, leaving behind a trail of disturbed earth, but also subtle misdirections, a snapped branch pointing the wrong way, a handful of leaves scattered to obscure their tracks. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of running, hiding, and listening. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Lucas knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Ethan was flagging, his small face pale and drawn. Then, through the trees, he saw it, a dilapidated cabin, almost swallowed by the encroaching forest. Its windows were boarded up, the roof sagged, but it offered shelter, at least for a night. "This way," he muttered, leading them towards the cabin. He tested the door cautiously. Rusted hinges screamed in protest as he pushed it open. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay, but it was dry and offered 4 walls and a roof. Maya immediately set about barring the door with a heavy wooden beam they found. Leaning against the wall, Ethan huddled in a corner, shivering despite the relatively mild temperature. Lucas leaned against the wall, catching his breath. He peeled back his shirt, wincing at the sight of the angry bruise blooming across his ribs. He pulled out a flask from his jacket, took a swig, and offered it to Maya. She shook her head. "You need it more than I do." She knelt beside Ethan, wrapping her arms around him. "It's okay, baby. We're safe now." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear she tried so hard to conceal. Lucas retrieved a tattered first aid kit from his backpack. He cleaned the gash on his ribs as best he could with antiseptic wipes. The pain was intense, but he bit back a groan. He needed to be strong for them. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice low. "They'll find us eventually." Maya looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Then what do we do?" Lucas examined the cabin, noting the rotted wood and the precarious state of the roof. He knew he couldn't outrun Volkov forever. He had to fight back. "We expose him," he said, his voice hardening. "We find a way to get proof of what he's doing to the authorities." He pulled out a worn map from his pocket, tracing a route with his finger. "There's a ranger station about 15 miles west of here. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance." He looked at Maya, his gaze unwavering. "We leave at dawn. We have to be ready. This isn't over. Justice served." The crunch of snow under heavy boots echoed through the silent woods. Volkov, his face a mask of cruel satisfaction, emerged from the trees, flanked by 2 of his most formidable enforcers. They had Lucas cornered at the edge of the frozen lake, the thin ice a treacherous border. Nowhere left to run. "Thorne." Volkov's voice was a low, grating growl. "Hand over the children. Save yourself some pain." Lucas stood firm, his arm protectively around Maya and Ethan. Ethan trembled, clutching Maya's hand. Maya, though pale, met Volkov's gaze with a defiant fire in her eyes. "Go to hell," she spat. Lucas squeezed her shoulder. "Take Ethan and go now." He knew this fight was his. He had to buy them time. Maya hesitated, her grip tightening on Ethan. "I'm not leaving you. Maya, please. Trust me." He saw the struggle in her eyes, the fear warring with her fierce loyalty. Go. Into the woods. Head west. You know the way. With a final, desperate look, she nodded. She pulled Ethan along, disappearing into the dense trees, leaving Lucas to face the storm. Volkov chuckled. Brave girl. Foolish girl. My men will find them. He gestured to his enforcers. Deal with him. The two men advanced, their movements practiced and lethal. Lucas braced himself. His senses heightened as he sidestepped the first attack. A brutal punch aimed at his jaw, and retaliated with a swift kick to the attacker's knee. The man crumpled, howling in pain. The second enforcer lunged, drawing a knife. Meanwhile, Maya, true to her spirit, wasn't running blindly. She forced Ethan to crouch low as they circled back, keeping the sounds of the fight within earshot. Remember what I showed you? She whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The snares, the tripwires. We use everything. Ethan, his eyes wide with terror, nodded that he remembered Maya had insisted on teaching him survival skills, even when he'd protested, preferring his drawing pad now. Those skills were their only hope. They worked quickly. Silently, Maya strung a thin wire across a narrow path, anchoring it to two thick trees. Then, using sharpened branches and lengths of vine, she created a series of small, painful traps. Ethan, surprisingly steady despite his fear, helped her, his small hands surprisingly adept. Back at the lake, Lucas fought with a grim determination. He was outmatched in numbers, but his training and his burning desire to protect the children fueled him. He disarmed the knife-wielding enforcer, using the momentum to throw him off balance and send him crashing to the ground. But Volkov wasn't just watching, he joined the fray, his powerful frame moving with surprising agility as Volkov's men pursued Maya and Ethan. One triggered a snare, he went sprawling, cursing, as his leg was yanked out from under him. Another blundered into a thicket of sharpened branches, his face scratched and bleeding. They were slowing down, their focus disrupted. Hearing the commotion, Lucas risked a glance towards the woods. He saw the chaos, the tripped men, and a flicker of movement. Maya, a defiant silhouette against the trees. A surge of pride, mixed with terror, washed over him. He used the distraction to his advantage, landing a series of blows on Volkov, forcing him back. But Volkov was relentless, his eyes burning with a cold fury. He grabbed Lucas, throwing him to the ground. He raised his fist to strike the final blow. But before he could connect, a rock, thrown with surprising force, slammed into the back of his head. Volkov staggered, momentarily stunned. Lucas seized the opportunity. He kicked Volkov's legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto the ice. The ice groaned under the weight. Lucas stood, breathing heavily, towering over Volkov. He didn't kill him, he couldn't. He dragged Volkov to the edge of the woods, where the sounds of approaching sirens grew louder. He left him there for the authorities, a broken man exposed to the cold, harsh light of justice. Days later, Lucas watched from a distance as Maya and Ethan settled into a new home. It was a small cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a colorful garden. A kind woman with a warm smile ushered them inside. They were safe. He knew he couldn't stay. His past still haunted him, the darkness still lingered. But knowing that Maya and Ethan were safe, that he had finally done something good, gave him a measure of peace he hadn't felt in years. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the woods, a solitary figure seeking redemption in the silence. He would always watch over them from afar.